Before we get into this video, I would like to thank my patrons, Harpy, Corporal Hot Pockets, and Salvatore Di Pietro. The three of you make this channel possible, and you guys are awesome. What would a society that is driven by war look like? Warhammer has no end to conflict. After all, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. In a way, human society is dominated and driven by war. The Imperium is always fighting someone or something, somewhere, somehow, be it itself, the orcs whose sole purpose is to fight in battle, the Tyranids, traitorous Astartes, demons, you name it. This has had a visible and profound impact on the Imperium's culture and society, which we'll take a look at today. One note, if you would consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, I would really appreciate it. I have a Patreon for those of you who would like early access to content and behind the scenes stuff. There is a public Discord for my community. I've got a Destiny clan, lots of stuff. All of it is in my link tree down below. Also, side note, patrons who join the Discord get access to unique roles and channels, so that's fun. That said, let's get right into it. When discussing the Imperium of man's culture and society, the first thing that we have to understand is its size. The Imperium consists of more than 1 million settled worlds. It is the largest political entity in the galaxy, and this shows. This means that humanity is a very inconsistent and scattered race. It isn't uncommon for Imperial worlds to be lost and found again. Entire star systems might even be misplaced or forgotten about due to the sheer, unfathomable size of the Imperium. Hypothetically speaking, a powerful AI could oversee and manage this empire, but the Imperium is against automation. Artificial intelligence is strictly outlawed and heretical. There are billions upon billions of scribes working every second of every day within the Administratum to oversee and manage the Imperium, and as such, things will get messy quite often. One mistake and a planet of 20 million people stops getting food shipments because the intern Jim forgot to write the planet's name down on a piece of paper. Now that planet is going to starve and collapse because the new updated list of planets doesn't include it. 1,000 years later, a ship stops by and finds a battered, fallen, feral world of cannibals and murderers. Another factor that we have to consider is travel time and communications. The warp is an ever-turbulent beast that is uncooperative and tricky to navigate. Let's compare the Imperium to Halo's unified Earth government. The UEG, while far weaker in just about every aspect of the Imperium, is infinitely more efficient and interconnected. It is organized, fast, and it has an easy method of communication. As an example, towards the start of the Covenant War, when humanity first became aware of the Covenant, the UNSC was immediately put on high alert. Overnight, the entire military was notified of a threat and prepared to mobilize. Now, there was a lot the UNSC did wrong early in the war, and a lot more it simply couldn't have prepared for. See my video on the UNSC military-industrial complex for more on that. The point is the speed of it. Let's look at what happened when the Imperium first encountered the Tyranids. By the time the Imperium had realized that the Tyranids were advancing into the galaxy, a lot of planets had been devoured. Just for reference, the Tyranids got so far that they were able to reach and devastate Macroc, the home of the Ultramarines. The Imperium is slow, inefficient, and scattered. While that has been changing thanks to the return of Primarch Robu Gilliman, that does not change the fact that the Imperium is less one giant entity, and more so a massive collection of worlds which are kept in place by force. Each planet will develop its own culture, society, traditions, and more. The only constant in the Imperium is the worship of the God Emperor and the hatred of the mutant, psyker, heretic, Xenos, and abominable intelligence. When managing a galaxy-spanning society, one must find a way to organize the many worlds, settlements, etc. that will fall under their influence. To accomplish this, the Adeptus Administratum has created a broad list of classifications in which planets can fall under. Simply put, a planet is judged by its worth or value. Its function determines what it is classified as. While I will cover this more in the upcoming economics section, it is important to know that everything revolves around the Imperial tithe. A tithe is more or less a tax that a planet is mandated to pay. This is not necessarily a currency. It could be manpower, equipment, resources, food, medicine, shipyards, etc. However, some planets are unique in the sense that they are not subject to a heavy tithe. They may serve a different function, be a fascinating case study, or the Imperium just doesn't care for their development. So, let's start. Agricultural worlds, or agri-worlds, are planets that are primarily dedicated to providing food for the Imperium at large, in particular the massive armies within the Astra Militarum and the untamed populations of hive cities. Agri-worlds do not have much in the way of populations. They tend to have less than 100 million residents globally, and for reference, India has more than 1.4 billion people living there today. Life on an agri-world is quite difficult, contrary to Imperial propaganda. It has backbreaking labor and harsh polluted environments, and really this is an everyday occurrence if you live there. Still, without these planets, the Imperium would quite frankly starve. Hive worlds are the most famous of the Imperium's planets. They are hubs of industry, commerce, trade, and manpower. They are vitally important to Imperial policy, and thus you will find a considerable amount of resources are allocated to the defense of these planets alone. A hive world is a planet that contains one or more hive cities. I already have a video detailing hives which you can find linked below, but simply put, they are continent-spanning cities that house many billions, sometimes trillions of civilians. The category of civilized worlds is easily the largest and most broad. No two civilized worlds are the same, and all of them are different, but they share general characteristics. 1. They have been allowed to progress and develop over the millennia on their own. 2. They have populations ranging from 15 million to 10 billion. 3. They pay a fairly high imperial tithe. 4. They know their place under the Imperium. 5. They can be separated into multiple geographical regions, be it by states, local counties, countries, etc. 6. It may have population centers, but it is not yet at the level of a full-on hive. If you want a reference, our own society today, were it to be under the Imperium, would be considered a civilized world. In terms of technology, it really depends. The Imperium doesn't provide them much in that department, but we can rightly assume that a good chunk of these civilized worlds are fairly advanced. That said, poverty and wealth distribution varies from planet to planet, so really you can use your imagination here. A Forge world is a planet that is directly controlled and governed by the Adeptus Mechanicus. They are solely devoted to the manufacturing and distribution of machinery used by the Imperium of Man. Forge worlds are more or less the sole producers of most forms of hardware in the Imperium, but there are exceptions. Furthermore, Forge worlds are where the military arms of the Mechanicus are based, such as their Titan legions or fleets. They all reside on the Forge worlds until they are called upon. And, of course, Forge worlds always assist in uncovering and reverse engineering lost technology, or STCs. Feral worlds are underdeveloped planets which will have small populations and little to no technology. Agriculture tends to be limited at best, non-existent at worst. Typically, residents of these planets are nomadic hunter-gatherers, living lives equivalent to Terra's ancient Stone Age. However, some feral worlds have societies living in the Bronze and early Iron Ages. Why these planets are so primitive can vary from failed colonization to cultural preference. As usual, no two worlds are truly the same. The Imperium could develop these worlds in theory and turn them into something more industrially or agriculturally productive, but feral worlds tend to serve a much greater purpose. The harsh living conditions found on these planets make them perfect for Astartes chapters seeking to recruit hardened candidates, and in some cases the Astra Militarum will recruit from these worlds to make specialized units. Feudal worlds are somewhat similar to feral worlds, but they tend to be a little more advanced. These worlds are devoid of modern technology, but they are given access to medicines and machinery dedicated to health in the case of a plague. Some feudal worlds have access to relatively advanced technology, but they are unable to manufacture or industrialize. Typically, feudal worlds are advanced to the point of either the Iron Age or the early Gunpowder Age. In terms of their societies, they are not unlike early Terran societies found in the Middle Ages of Europe. They do not pay much in terms of imperial tithes. Dead worlds are exactly what they sound like. Dead. They have little to no naturally occurring life on them. Usually this is due to a natural element, perhaps an ancient cataclysm, the planet's position relative to its star, volcanic activity, a toxic atmosphere, you name it. However, some have been created as a result of warfare, be it by exterminatus or something else. The Imperium has had a long and chaotic history. Some settlements crop up on these planets, but for the most part the only ones who settle on dead worlds are Astartes chapters. Death worlds, not to be confused with the aforementioned dead worlds, are planets that are too harsh or dangerous for widespread human settlement. Death worlds are not dead, actually they can be full of diverse wildlife. They are specifically called death worlds because of how harsh and unforgiving they are to settlers and local. They bring death to all who go there. As an example, Catachan is a death world due to its deadly plant life, low life expectancy, and it's just generally a pretty shitty place to live. However, death worlds like Catachan tend to breed some of humanity's strongest warriors, which the Astra Militarum and the Astartes also make use of. Armory worlds, the guard's toy box of weapons. Night worlds, planets with giant robots that are called knights and are smaller than titans. Shrine worlds, sucking off the God Emperor 4056, the sequel everyone asked for. Cardinal worlds, Space Pope runs the place, not to be confused with Shrine worlds. Cemetery worlds, exactly what they sound like. Pleasure worlds, Space Hawaii. War worlds, Big Kaboom. Fortress worlds, you shall not pass the planets. Sentinel worlds, Fortress worlds but more edgy. Derelict worlds, nobody lives there. Rad worlds, they aren't rad, just radioactive. Arboreal worlds, tree people. Swamp world, Shrek lives there. Chem worlds, Poison Ivy's worst nightmare. Mining worlds, wanna play Minecraft but real life and deadly? Industrial worlds, Forge worlds but not dedicated to the Omnissiah. Waste worlds, the Imperium's toilet. Forbidden worlds, Space Pripyat but without the tourists irradiating themselves. Frontier worlds, Oregon Trail time. Desert worlds, it's in the name. Ice worlds, Sanguinala 24/7. Ocean worlds, Avatar Way of Water but the filthy Xenos have been eradicated. There are more, but those are not strictly under the Imperium's control and are not important today. Here we are going to dive into a bit of a controversial debate in the 40k community, the population of the Imperium. To say that debates about this can get heated would be an understatement. There was this whole beef between lore tubers a while back, and I just don't want to get into that. So I'm not going to get into who I think is right or wrong. I'm just going to give my take on things, just my opinion. You are welcome to disagree with me. I have a Discord if you would like to debate, wink wink. Firstly, how many people live in the Imperium? Short answer, a lot. A lot of people live in the Imperium of Man. Sometimes the phrase that gets thrown around is something something mankind in its untamed billions. But quite frankly, this estimate is a lowball. Terra alone has been shown in the hundreds of billions to the quadrillions depending on the source and book. And, quite frankly, planets like Terra are the driving factor here. Terra is an ecumenopolis, a literal planet-spanning city, and I'm not just talking about the surface of the planet here, I mean the whole planet is a city. So I'm just gonna say Terra's population is somewhere in the trillions, low or high, take your pick, it's up to you really. But if we want to get to the actual population of the Imperium, I'd have to save that for another video. It's fun, it's huge, requires a fuck ton of math, and I'm probably gonna need help with that, but I digress. So the question I will try to answer here is this: what is life like for the bulk of the human population? Some folks think it is absolute shit, others think it is not that bad unless you live in a hive, an agri-world, or another harsh planet. Do hive worlds make up the bulk of the Imperium? No, I've seen figures like 10%, 25%, 33%, it varies. The bulk of Imperial planets are likely advanced civilized worlds, and life there, as I mentioned, can vary. And then we account for other planets, cardinal worlds, shrine worlds, pleasure worlds, etc., and we can reliably say that the majority of Imperial planets are, at the very least, tolerable. But here is the kicker: population density doesn't care about that. Yes, a majority of planets could be bearable or even pleasant, but the actual amount of people living on them might be different. Given the fact that a hive has tens of billions to hundreds of billions, maybe even somewhere in the low trillions, and hive worlds tend to have multiple hives, well, we shouldn't count them out. Let's just take a look at the modern-day continental United States. Its population is not distributed evenly across the states. There are 332 million people living in the mainland US. 39 million of them live in California. Neighboring Nevada, for example, has 3.1 million, Arizona has 7 million, Oregon has 4.2 million, and the state of Washington has 7.7 million. California has 39 million residents, as mentioned earlier. 10 million of them, or nearly a quarter of the state's population, lives in a single county, Los Angeles County. So going back to the Imperium of Man, there may be a lot more civilized worlds than there are hive worlds, but there may be a lot more people living on the hive worlds than the civilized worlds. And given how notoriously clustered together a hive's citizens are, and how many citizens live in a hive, and the massive size of a single hive, I think it is safe to say that generally speaking, the bulk of the population lives in a hive. Whether or not their misery is non-existent or omnipresent will depend entirely on where in the hive they are. See my video on hives for reference. That said, Yeah, that's my take on the population of the Imperium in Warhammer 40k. The Imperium of Man needs to have a government at large to function. Previously in 30k, the Emperor and loyal advisors, such as Malkador the Sigillite, would be responsible for the overall governance of the Imperium, with a series of local officials responsible for administering sectors which themselves are divided accordingly, all the way down to the level of individual towns and cities. It was big and somewhat slow, but it functioned, worked, and had a strong degree of compliance, oversight, and accountability. Any laws and decrees would be enforced by the Emperor's sons, the Primarchs. However, with the majority of the Loyalist Primarchs missing, the Astartes legions gutted and carved up into chapters, and the Emperor interred on the Golden Throne, things are very, very different in the late 41st, now early 42nd millennium. For a good while, the Imperium was actually a decaying, rotting carcass of an empire, and it can be argued that this is still the case. However, with the return of Loyalist Primarch Roboute Guilliman, things have been slowly stabilizing. This has led to a complete renaissance in the Imperium and, to an extent, a revival of its major institutions as they are reorganized and reformed to be more efficient. It is hard to emphasize just how much Guilliman has managed to accomplish, but sadly for the Avenging Son, there is still a great deal to do. But, as Lord Commander of the Imperium and the current Imperial Regent, he was the perfect Primarch to return. With that in mind, let's look at the Imperium's government and how they have changed under Guilliman. There is a lot to cover here, so I will have to be brief and save some topics for another time. The governing body of the Imperium is known as the Adeptus Terra, or the Priesthood of Earth. It is a massive organism made up of many, many, many departments and branches and authorities that run the Imperium. At the very top of the Adeptus Terra, you have the Emperor. However, seeing as the Emperor is currently incapacitated, Guilliman is ruling as regent in his stead. Beneath the Emperor, you have the Senatorum Imperialis, or the High Lords of Terra. This group is comprised of the 12 highest-ranked individuals of the Imperium's largest institutions. They carry out the day-to-day decisions that are required to ensure the Imperium runs. They pass laws, make political decisions, and lead during times of crisis. At the head of the High Lords is the Lord Commander of the Imperium, which is currently Guilliman. Actually, upon the Avenging Son's return to Terra, 5 of the High 12, alongside hundreds of lesser lords within the nobility, were either replaced, removed from office, or made to disappear. The Primarch ensured that he was in command, and that he was able to enter the Era Indomitus with the Imperium at its most politically united since the Heresy. Now, there are institutions that technically reside somewhat outside the Senatorum Imperialis' control, that being the Mechanicus, Inquisition, and Ministorum, or Ecclesiarchy. However, under Guilliman, these three entities have much less freedom to do as they please. Going back to the Imperial Adepta, there are a number of departments that fall under the Adeptus Terra. The Adeptus Administratum, the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Fleet, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the Adeptus Astronomica, the Adeptus Arbites, the Adeptus Astartes, the Adeptus Fiducius, the Synopticon, and the Logos Historica Verita. Logos Historica? I'm just going to say Logos Historica Verita. If you have the correct pronunciation, let me know. Thank you. All of these deserve their own videos, so we'll have to be brief. The Administratum is the main bureaucratic body of the Adeptus Terra, ensuring that the Imperium runs properly. Billions upon billions of scribes work constantly to keep everything afloat. The Administratum has many divisions: the Departmentum Munitorum, General Administration, the Estate Imperium, which keeps records, the Historical Revision Unit, which oversees and revises Imperial historical records. There's the Officio Medicae, which is responsible for public health. They do a very bad job, as you can imagine. There's the Logis Strategos, primary intelligence and analysis. That's what they do. There's the Logos Historical Verita, as mentioned earlier. It's actually under the Administratum, but it's a little more independent because it was founded and run by Guilliman. It recovers and records accurate imperial history. There's the Munitorum Strategic Intelligence Collective, which is a secret anti-Tyranid task force, and then there is the Tithes Chamber Notaries Subplanetary Census, which oversees the recognition of sanctioned abhumans. And then there are the Officio Agricolte and Officio Assassinorum. One manages Agriworlds and one is the spot for secret assassins. Now, moving back to the other major institutions, the Astra Militarum or Imperial Guard is the primary fighting force of the Imperium. It is comprised of a great many armies from hundreds of thousands of worlds. From the normal guardsman to the Catachan fighter, the Imperial Guard will handle most matters that require a las gun and a bayonet. The Imperial fleet has four primary bodies within it: the Navis Imperialis, the Merchant Fleets, Civil Fleets, and the Navis Nobilite. The one we shall focus on today is the Navis Imperialis, the Imperial Navy. It is responsible for fighting the battles in the heavens above, oftentimes being what determines whether the Imperium shall taste victory or defeat on any given day. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica is responsible for the recruitment and training of psychers. Newsflash, if you are a psycher and the Astra Telepathica doesn't want you, odds are you're going to be handed over to the Adeptus Astronomicon, where you're going to be sacrificed. Why? Because the Adeptus Astronomicon must keep the beacon of the actual Astronomicon alight. Without it, the Imperium would fall apart due to an inability to properly navigate through the warp. The Adeptus Arbites serves as the Imperium's law enforcement. They are the judges, juries, and executioners, if need be, of all criminals and heretics. That said, most Imperial citizens will not be allotted the privilege of due process. The only time someone will see a courthouse is if they are of high standing, or if the law is unclear on how they should be handled, in which case an Arbites judge will decide their fate. This one you're almost certainly familiar with, the Adeptus Astartes, or Space Marines. The Emperor's grandsons are often given a significant degree of independence, and they hold a great deal of sway in Imperial politics, though for the most part they keep to themselves. That said, you should never find yourself on the bad side of an Astartes. A certain Goj Van Dyer would attest to this. Recently, with the Avenging Sun's return to the galaxy, the Adeptus Astartes have become far more organized. The Adeptus Fiducius is the Imperium's treasury and revenue service. They are known for audits and a harsh enforcement of tithes. The Synopticon is dedicated to signals, intelligence, and security surveillance for the Imperial Adepta. All of these institutions are vital for the Imperium's survival, and each of them deserve their own video, and there are a few minor institutions that I had to leave out. That said, knowing how the Adeptus Terra functions is vital to understanding the rest of the Imperium at large. The Imperium of Man has an interesting economy in the sense that its economy is not something you and I would be familiar with. A lot of this is speculative, but I will use existing lore to give you an idea of what the Imperium's economy probably looks like. And, of course, I will make note of pre-existing speculation made by the community at large. Let's start with currency. Because I'm American and the bulk of my audience is American, I'll use the US dollar as an example. All 50 states in the accompanying US territories, such as Guam and Puerto Rico, make use of the US dollar. This is a universal currency that flows throughout the local economy, and I should note that while other countries have their own currencies, a lot of international trade is done through the US dollar. But back to the US. Want to get food? Go to a grocery store, spend some dollars. Want a house? Spend some dollars. You exchange currency for goods and services, and you gain currency for giving goods and services in return. Fairly simple. In the Imperium, however, things are different. Yes, currency does exist, yes, it is used, yes, wealth is definitely a thing. However, it is not regulated like the dollar or euro is. In a society as vast and large as the Imperium of Man, centralization and standardization can be difficult at best, impossible at worst. It doesn't help that warp travel is inefficient and inconsistent, and communication between systems can be a huge endeavor at times. To top all that off, the Imperium does things by hand. There are billions of scribes working across the Administratum to chart and record the various planets, and so it may take years to decades, sometimes centuries, for things to get from Terra to a far-off settlement and vice versa. This means that generally speaking, the Imperial economy is not very interconnected, rather they are a scattered collection of localized economies. As such, we have seen many currencies: thrones, aquillas, credits, gelt, tithe beads, etc. Most Imperials will not touch any of these currencies, rather they may receive something called a scrip, a substitute currency that applies to their own local region. Darktide actually has a good example of this, Ordo Dockets. However, that does not mean that trade and commerce are dead. Take a hive city as an example. The upper hive may be full of shops and businesses in which something akin to a middle upper class will shop, dine, go to a cinema, etc., Rogue traders will come to port, whereas the lower hive may be divided into districts and sections, in which people working for a manufactorum are allotted a corporate allowance, or scrip, in which they could use that scrip to pay their premiums and gain access to food, power for their homes, etc. Furthermore, you could have trades based on goods and practicality. Say, I am a doctor on a feudal world. Now, someone with a trade wants my goods and services because their child is sick. This person happens to make simple gunpowder rifles. I could say, sure, I will give your child healthcare. In exchange, I need a rifle to protect myself from bandits. Or trade could occur at the interplanetary level. An agri-world happens to be near a hive world. This agri-world would provide the hives with food in exchange. The hive would provide labor in the form of servitors and workers to the agri-world, alongside maintaining equipment and such. This hive world would then go to a nearby forge world and provide servitors and labor to be turned into servitors for the mechanicus, who will then manufacture the more heavy-duty equipment needed by the hive for the manufactorums. This trade also goes for things like services from the wider Imperium. Want to be protected by the Astra Militarum and Navis Imperialis? Provide something of value and provide it in abundance. Hives do this in the form of manpower, equipment, labor, etc., as mentioned earlier. But if that is the case, how does the Imperium maintain such a tight grip on its planets when it can't even regulate anything? The simple answer is by force, but there is more to it than that. Earlier on in the video, I mentioned tithes. Tithes are more or less a mandated tax or obligation. Historically speaking, in real life, religious institutions would collect tithes to further their goals and expand. These tithes took up 10% of a person or settlement's annual income or production, so 10% of a harvest, 10% of a currency, etc. In the Imperium, tithes are not limited to 10% and can vary based on the planet in question. A hive world, as an example, has to pay a huge tithe in the form of things like, once again, manpower. Billions of people are conscripted into the Astra Militarum from hives. Furthermore, hives, being the massive industrial hubs they are, also have to allocate a certain amount of what they make to the Imperium at large. Failure to meet these tithes will typically result in the Adeptus Munitorum stepping in and rearranging the upper class. In other words, shooting, deporting, or imprisoning local officials and installing new, harsher governors and officers, while also ordering a near-constant security presence from the Adeptus Arbites. While in most cases the Imperium is slow to act due to its size, tithes are important. Tithes ensure that the Imperium at large can function, and they ensure that the militant elements of the Empire can actually continue to fight in the never-ending wars that have spread across the galaxy. Even the loss of a single hive city could hamper or even cripple a local campaign, and you will find the Imperium fighting tooth and nail to keep them in line. If a tithe isn't complied with, the Imperium will act, and it will act as fast as it can. And, should things continue to be an issue, the Imperium will flat out use the Astra Militarum to enforce a tithe, regardless of whether or not it is sustainable for the locals. And should the locals resist, then you might see a purge followed by the forceful immigration of new residents for a planet. This is actually pretty common. And in the case of a planet being ravaged by war, should the Imperium triumph in the region, it will work with all haste to salvage it if possible. This is another function of hives, by the way. An incident on an agri-world makes the atmosphere toxic and kills the entire population? Not to worry. Clean up the atmosphere, get things fixed up, and take a new batch of couple million people or whatever from some random hive, so that way you can repopulate the new and not improved agri-world. All that matters to the Adeptus Terra is that the overall whole of society is functioning just enough to survive. You as an individual do not matter, and the galaxy frankly does not care. Your death is meaningless, and you can easily be replaced by someone else. This is a necessary evil, because if the Imperium stopped doing things this way, there would be no Imperium, and without the Imperium, there would be no humanity. The Imperium has a long and rich history, and there are many different beliefs and ideas that mix within this sprawling empire. That said, if there is a way to describe Imperial culture, it would be 3 words: worship, trauma, and paranoia. One thing that is often not emphasized enough in Warhammer is that a lot of the behaviors of humanity in the galaxy stem from deep wounds that have never healed, traumas that have forever changed us as a species. The Imperium is not humanity at its best, not even close. Even when the Emperor himself was in command, our kind was still a far cry from what it once was. We were once described as mortals on the cusp of achieving godhood, a powerful, untouchable empire of progress, science, reasoning, and understanding. A great series of events would tear all of that down. A revolt led by a group of AI known as the Men of Iron led to a war so devastating the galaxy is still feeling its effects to this day. The birth of Slaanesh and the arrival of the Old Knights scattered our species across the galaxy, leading to a total societal collapse that might have driven us to extinction. Demons, Xenos, AI, our own arrogance, the fall from grace, it has led humanity to become a paranoid, superstitious species which despises nearly anything that is not seen as normal. Artificial intelligence? No, that is abominable intelligence and should never exist again. Innovation? That could lead to automation and tech heresy. If it isn't broken, don't fix it, just maintain it. Psychers? They're witches that need to be hunted and only the most valuable can be of service to the Imperium. The Psyker is a portal to the Immaterium and thus it is demonic. There's a new type of human with abnormally long limbs. Mutant! Destroy it! A quick note for those of you that are curious, and if this kind of topic isn't your thing or you just want to get back to the main lore video, you can skip to the point in the top right corner. Not a problem, but that said, I've actually had a few people ask me about what I'm about to talk about here, and that is whether or not the Imperium accepts, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, asexual folks, etc. And I can see where this kind of comes from. The Imperium is a very intolerant place, and oftentimes we associate intolerance with modern examples we can see today. And simply put, yeah, the Imperium is just fine with the LGBTQ community, and we have canon examples of character who have either been implied to be part of the community or have outright been noted as such. We have to remember that the social issues of the 41st and 42nd millennium are not the social issues of today. If you are a woman and you love another woman, that's fine, so long as you worship the Emperor and do your part. The Inquisition won't be paying you a visit. It is when you say, down with the Emperor, or you start to protest your labor standards, that things become an issue, in which case the issue isn't that you happen to love a certain way or identify a certain way. The issue is that you are a heretic and need to be purged from the Imperium for spewing your anti-Emperor filth. The intolerance of the Imperium is solely directed at things that are considered by them to be less than human or not human, so abhumans like Ogryn or witches like Psychers, abominable intelligence, so sentient machines, Xenos like Eldar. So basically, yes, space intolerance is 100% a thing in the Imperium, and it is pretty much predominant in Imperial culture, but that generally only applies to the actual fictional setting of Warhammer, and not something that you and I would commonly see debated today. Not trying to be political or push anything here, just it is something I've seen discussed, I've been approached about it, and as someone in the LGBTQ+ community, I just thought I would make note of it. That's all. At the end of the day, this is Warhammer, a setting that is all about everything killing everything else, so it isn't really a relevant topic, but yeah. The Imperium is also dominated by a love and reverence of the Emperor. You aren't praying to our Lord and Savior, the God Emperor of mankind, every time you weld a plate onto a tank, Jim? Heathen! Heretic! Honestly, this one scene from If the Emperor Had a Text to Speech just encapsulates the Imperium's seriousness when it comes to this stuff.
You have sullied your hands with filthy parchments of heresy, guardsmen. How do you plead?
What? No.
Too late, heretic.
You inspire your men to study such foul smut, Commissar? You heretic!
Detestable mutants fill your heads with such vile obscenity! Die, heretic!
But at the same time, the Imperium cannot fully be generalized because that is just impossible when you have so many settlements across such a vast swath of space. So there's a lot to say here, though another thing that is fairly constant across the Imperium is this mentality of work for the Emperor, prove your worth. Much of the Imperium citizens work through long hours of backbreaking labor, which is oftentimes dangerous and even deadly. As such, the Imperium has to breed this sense of work equals worth. The more you work, the more you're worth. If you are not willing to work, you don't deserve any comforts or pleasantries because you're not devoting yourself to the Emperor, so all the amenities you'd be craving anyways would be withheld by default if you try to protest your conditions. In the harsher realms of the Empire, there's this prevailing sentiment that you are replaceable and your death was just a result of being too weak. Yes, you would be mourned by those around you, but the beast that is the Imperium marches onwards, and you shall be swiftly and effortlessly replaced by someone else. As I mentioned, to the Imperium, you have no value and your life does not matter. This, of course, also means that there is a sense of being lesser. You're a servant. This is what the God Emperor saw fit to give you in life. And then in the upper echelons of society, there is this constant cutthroat culture of aristocrats and prestige. The rich nobility, residents of the upper hives, denizens of pleasure worlds, these people are privileged, and it shows. They're in constant competition with each other to gain more, to collect more, to grow their influence, and all the while they are very conservative and do not care much for the masses below. And, okay, I should clarify something. Conservative, not in the modern, like, 21st century political sense. I mean conservative in the sense that, you know, they just want to keep the Imperium as it is. Let's not get political here. I'm regretting that word already. Anyways, this has actually had an interesting effect on things like marriage in the Imperium. In the lower rank-and-file aspects of Imperial society, you'll see plenty of examples of love being a motivating factor for marriage and courtship. As an example, in Hell's Reach, a guardsman makes note of wanting to marry a woman he's fallen for, whereas in the upper levels of the Imperium, marriage is a bit more fitting of its original purpose. It is a binding of families, an establishment of political allegiance, an exchange of wealth and prestige. So, yeah, fun stuff. The Imperium's future is far from certain, as is the case with all things in Warhammer 40k. With the Avenging Sun's return to the galaxy, we have seen the Imperium get back on its feet and weather the current storm, but with the Chaos Gods starting to renew their mild interest in the mortal plane, the impending arrival of the main Tyranid hive, the rising influence of the Tau, the increased boldness of the Eldar, bigger Orc Waz, the continuous reawakening of the Necrons, and more, Gilliman's gonna need help. And oh boy, is he about to get it. So that was my first video detailing Imperial society in 40k and how it affects the lives of so many. What do you think? What should I cover next? Let me know what you think in the comments on my Discord and on my Patreon, and I will see you in the cosmos, friends.